My name is Walter, and I turned 64 this spring. For most of my adult life, I worked as an operations manager at a mid-sized manufacturing company. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I was the one who made sure things ran smoothly, who stayed late when shipments were delayed, who got the phone calls at 2 a.m. when a machine broke down. For 41 years, that building was as familiar to me as my own living room. I missed birthdays, vacations, and even a few holidays because I believed that providing for my family meant sacrifices, and I made them without a second thought. My wife, Eleanor, used to tell me that one day I'd look back and regret not being more present, but I thought the payoff would be worth it. I thought they'd understand someday. The truth is, I always pictured retirement as something gentle, almost cinematic. I imagined sitting on the porch with Eleanor, maybe traveling a little, watching my grandkids grow up. I thought there would be a celebration, but one filled with the recognition of the years I gave, the hours I traded for stability, and the countless times I put others before myself. What I didn't expect was the hollow joke of my own retirement party. It started as a company event, but my family insisted on joining in. "We'll make it extra special," my son Kevin had said. He's 34 now, sharp, ambitious, and always eager to be the center of attention. He inherited Eleanor's quick wit, though somewhere along the way, it turned mean-spirited. My daughter Nina, younger by 3 years, is quieter, more reserved. She and I used to have a close bond, but distance grew when she moved out west, chasing her own life. She still called, still tried in her own way, but it always felt like Kevin's shadow loomed larger at every family gathering. The night of the party, the conference room was packed. Balloons, streamers, and those cheap plastic congratulations banners covered the walls. Coworkers I trained decades ago clapped me on the back, congratulating me on making it to the finish line. There were speeches, some kind, some rushed. But the moment that seared itself into my memory came when they wheeled out the cake. It was a large sheet cake frosted in white, with bright blue lettering piped across the top. And there it was, written for everyone to see, finally useless. The words sank into me like a stone. The room erupted in laughter. A chorus of chuckles, claps, and even a few whistles filled the air. I tried to play along, because what else could I do? My son was front and center, phone in hand, recording it all with a grin stretched across his face. "Dad, it's perfect," he shouted, as if mocking my life's work was some kind of clever punchline. Eleanor laughed too, hesitant at first, but then joining in, swept up in the wave. I caught Nina's eyes for a split second. She wasn't laughing. She looked down at her plate, fiddling with her fork. I smiled for the photos. I posed, knife in hand, pretending to cut the cake like it was all one big joke. Inside, though, something shifted. It wasn't just the cake. It was the culmination of years of quiet dismissals, of sacrifices that went unseen, of being the steady background character in my own family story. After the speeches, I picked up the tab for the restaurant portion. Naturally, Kevin raised a toast, clinking his glass against his new Rolexa purchase he hadn't stopped bragging about since the day he got it. "To Dad," he said, smirking. "May he enjoy being finally useless." Laughter roared again, and I swallowed it down with the bitter taste of my drink. When the night ended, they all filed out, patting me on the back, thanking me for dinner, promising to call soon. I drove home alone. Eleanor had decided to ride with Kevin, saying she wanted to help him with something important. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a flood of photos being tagged on social media. Smiling faces, clinking glasses, me in the background holding that ridiculous cake. I sat in the driveway for a long time, staring at the dark windows of my house. 41 years, and this was the send-off. The words replayed in my head. Finally useless. I don't know if I've ever felt so hollow. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked through my office, the one room in the house that was truly mine. Files, old photos, certificates, notes from projects long finished. I realized I had been holding on to a version of myself no one else seemed to see anymore. By dawn, I had made a decision. I cleared out my desk at the company later that morning, quietly and without fanfare. I packed my personal belongings into 2 boxes, loaded them into the car, and drove off. Not a word to Eleanor, not a call to Kevin, nothing to Nina. 3 weeks later, I heard from an old coworker that Eleanor had posted online. "If anyone knows where he is, please tell him we just want him back." But that's not where the story ends. It's only where it begins. When I left that night, I thought maybe it was just the sting of the moment. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe I'd look back on it and laugh. But the thing about humiliation is that it doesn't fade. It festers. Every time I replayed the party in my mind, I noticed new details. The way Kevin leaned back in his chair, smirking like the joke was his crowning achievement. How Eleanor had laughed harder once she realized everyone else was watching her reaction. The look on Nina's face when she glanced at me, then quickly away, like she was embarrassed for me, but too scared to say anything. In the days that followed, I tried to maintain some semblance of normal life. Eleanor carried on like nothing had happened. She even made a few casual comments about how I had plenty of time now to run errands, fix things around the house, and help Kevin with his new venture. That last part stuck with me. Kevin's new venture. He'd been talking about it for months, some startup idea involving property investments that, to me, sounded half-baked. But everyone around him treated it like the second coming of sliced bread. "Dad, you've got the experience," he said one evening when he stopped by. "All those years managing budgets, logistics. You could really help me get this thing off the ground. I mean, you don't have anything else going on now, right?" He said it with a grin, sipping from one of my beers like he owned the place. Eleanor chimed in. "It would be good for you, Walter. You don't want to just sit around the house all day. This could give you purpose." Purpose? The word hit me harder than it should have. After 41 years of providing, raising kids, paying mortgages, and keeping this family afloat, they spoke as if I had been wandering aimlessly until Kevin came up with his big idea. I told them I needed time to think about it. Kevin just shrugged. "Well, don't take too long. Opportunities don't wait, old man." He laughed as if it were playful banter, but there was no mistaking the edge in his voice. The favoritism had always been there, subtle at first. When Kevin was younger, he was the golden child. His report cards, his sports trophies, his charm, everything he did was celebrated. When Nina got into college, I remember her showing Eleanor her acceptance letter, beaming with pride. Eleanor congratulated her, but then immediately turned to Kevin, asking about his plans for the weekend, dismissing Nina's news as if it were nothing. It wasn't that Nina wasn't loved, but she was always treated like a side character in Kevin's story. And now, as adults, the pattern was stronger than ever. Nina would call to check in, telling Eleanor about her work, her travels, the people she'd met. Eleanor would nod politely, but when Kevin walked into the room, the entire atmosphere shifted. Suddenly, she was all smiles, hanging on his every word. After the retirement party, Kevin began to treat me like his personal assistant. He'd call in the middle of the day, asking me to pick up supplies, look over his proposals, or even drive across town to meet one of his potential investors because I had the free time. Each time I said yes, I felt a piece of myself erode. I wasn't helping my son succeed. I was enabling his arrogance. One afternoon, Nina came over while Kevin was in the kitchen with Eleanor. I was sitting in the living room, leafing through a folder of his so-called business plans. Nina sat beside me, her voice low. "Dad, you don't have to do this," she whispered. I looked at her, confused. "Do what?" "Run yourself ragged for him. He doesn't appreciate it. He never has." There was a sadness in her eyes, a quiet frustration that mirrored my own. Before I could respond, Kevin strutted into the room, clapping his hands together. "All right, team meeting time, Dad. You ready?" He tossed a stack of papers onto the table in front of me, barely glancing at Nina. "Sorry, sis. This might be a little over your head." Nina's face hardened, but she said nothing. She excused herself a few minutes later, muttering something about needing to leave. I watched her go, feeling torn. On one hand, she was right. I didn't have to do this. On the other hand, Eleanor looked so proud every time Kevin asked for my help, as if his validation mattered more than my well-being. The weeks wore on, and the small slights turned sharper. Eleanor began scheduling my days without asking. Doctor's appointments for her, grocery trips, favors for Kevin. When I pushed back, she'd frown and say, "Walter, you're retired. What else do you have to do?" One night, Kevin brought over a few of his friends for drinks. They were younger, loud, full of bravado. At some point, the conversation turned to me. "You're lucky, man," one of them said to Kevin. "Having a dad who can bankroll your startup and still run errands for you. That's like hitting the jackpot." The group laughed. Kevin didn't correct them. He just raised his glass and said, "Yeah, Dad's finally useful for something." I felt the blood rush to my face, but I said nothing. Eleanor sat beside me, sipping her wine as if the comment had never been made. That night, as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the bitterness deepened. I had become a joke to them. Not a father, not a husband, not a man who had given his life to provide just a tool to be used until I had nothing left to give. And yet, the worst was still to come. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary weekday that should have passed without a second thought. But I'll never forget it, because that was the day the ground gave way beneath me. I had been working through another one of Kevin's urgent requests. He'd asked me to review a contract he was planning to sign with a group of investors. To me, the numbers didn't make sense. The terms seemed predatory, and I told him as much. He brushed it off, laughing. "Dad, you're stuck in the old way of thinking. This is how real money gets made now." Still, he insisted I look it over, so I spent hours at the kitchen table, highlighting clauses, jotting down notes. Eleanor came in halfway through, setting a cup of coffee down beside me. "You worry too much," she said. "Kevin knows what he's doing. Just support him." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That afternoon, I decided to stop by the bank. I had always been cautious with finances, and I thought maybe if I spoke to someone, I could get a clearer picture. When I arrived, the clerk pulled up my account information, and my stomach dropped. There were withdrawals I didn't recognize. Large ones, spaced out over the last several weeks. $10,000 here, $15,000 there, another $20,000 not long after the retirement party. My balance, which should have been more than enough to cover the next few years comfortably, was dangerously low. I asked the clerk for more details, and that's when the betrayal hit me square in the chest. The withdrawals weren't random. They were transfers authorized under my name, but the recipient was unmistakable. Kevin. I felt the room tilt. My own son had been siphoning money from my account. I asked how that was even possible, and the clerk explained that Eleanor had co-signed some of the transactions. She must have known. She had to have known. I stood there dumbfounded, clutching the printout of my own disappearing life savings. That evening, I confronted Eleanor. She was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of soup as if nothing was wrong. "Eleanor," I said, holding up the papers, my voice shaking. "What is this? How long has Kevin been taking money out of my account?" She didn't even flinch. She sighed, set the spoon down, and turned to face me with that same patient look she used to give the kids when they were being difficult. "Walter, it's not what you think. He's borrowing it for the business. You'll get it back once he's successful." "Borrowing?" My voice cracked. "This is our retirement. 41 years, Eleanor. That money was for us, for our future. You let him drain it without even telling me." Her eyes hardened. "You're overreacting. Kevin has potential. He's building something. And if you can't see that, maybe you're the one holding him back." The words cut deeper than I thought possible. Holding him back. As if my entire life's work was nothing more than an obstacle to Kevin's ambition. Later that night, Kevin showed up, breezing through the front door like he owned the place. He didn't even wait for me to speak. "Dad, I know you saw the transfers. Relax. It's an investment. You should be thanking me. You're finally putting your money to good use instead of just letting it rot in the bank." I stared at him, my hands trembling. "You stole from me." He laughed. Actually laughed. "Stole? Come on, family share. You've been sitting on that money forever, doing nothing. I'm just moving it to where it'll actually grow. Don't worry, you'll get your cut when this thing blows up." Something inside me cracked. I looked at my son not as the boy I raised, not as the man I hoped he'd become, but as a stranger who saw me as nothing more than a wallet with legs. And my wife, the woman who had once stood beside me through hard times, was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, siding with him. I realized in that moment that I wasn't just disrespected. I was betrayed in the most intimate and deliberate way possible. The soup on the stove burned. The house smelled of smoke. And all I could think was, this is no longer my home. But that was only the beginning. After that night, the air in the house grew colder, heavier. It wasn't just the silence between us. It was the way Eleanor and Kevin carried on as if nothing was wrong, as if I had simply imagined the betrayal. Kevin still came over almost daily, dropping his coat on the couch, raiding the fridge, spreading out his contracts on my dining table. Eleanor cooked for him, praised him, nodded along to his stories about big deals on the horizon. Every now and then, she'd toss me a look, almost daring me to bring it up again. I didn't. Inside, though, I was unraveling. For the first time in my adult life, I felt powerless. Money had always been my safeguard, my proof that all the sacrifices were worth it. Now, every time I looked at the printout from the bank, I saw years of overtime shifts, missed vacations, and sleepless nights evaporating into Kevin's fantasy. It wasn't just the money. It was the realization that I had no allies in my own home. The woman I married had chosen our son's ambition over our security. My son had chosen greed over respect. Sleep became impossible. I'd lie awake in the dark, listening to Eleanor's steady breathing beside me, and wonder if she even felt a shred of guilt. In the mornings, I sat in my office, staring at the walls lined with certificates and photos, proof of a life that now felt meaningless. The faces in the photos looked younger, happier, unaware of what was to come. I tried to call Nina. She picked up on the second ring, her voice soft but tired. She lived 3 states away, and I hadn't told her the full story yet. "Dad, are you all right?" she asked. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to spill everything, to tell her how betrayed I felt, how Kevin was bleeding me dry. But I couldn't bring myself to burden her. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just wondering how you're doing." We talked about her job, her apartment, the small joys of her daily life. When I hung up, I sat there staring at the phone, the ache in my chest heavier than before. She was the one person who might have understood, and I couldn't even tell her. Meanwhile, Kevin's demands grew bolder. One afternoon, he dropped by with a folder in hand and a smug grin. "Dad, I need you to co-sign this," he said, sliding the papers across the table. "It's just a short-term loan. Low risk. You'll barely notice." I opened the folder and felt my stomach twist. It was a loan for nearly $50,000. My name was already typed on the line, waiting for my signature. "I'm not signing this," I said quietly. Kevin's smile faltered. "Dad, come on. This is how business works. You've got to take risks." "Not with my future," I replied, closing the folder. He stared at me, the grin gone now, replaced by something sharper. "You've already invested. Don't back out now." Eleanor, who had been hovering nearby, spoke up. "Walter, don't be stubborn. This is for all of us, for the family." "For the family," I snapped, "or just for him?" The tension hung in the air. Kevin's jaw tightened. Eleanor shook her head like I was being unreasonable. And for the first time, I didn't argue further. I simply got up, walked into my office, and shut the door. That became my habit. Silence instead of confrontation. I stopped eating dinner with them. When Kevin came over, I stopped answering his calls. When Eleanor tried to rope me into his errands, I made excuses. On the surface, it looked like I was withdrawing, fading into the background. But beneath the quiet, I was taking notes. I gathered bank statements, copies of transfers, and contracts Kevin had left behind. I created a folder hidden deep in my filing cabinet, where Eleanor would never think to look. Each document was proof, not just of the theft, but of the disrespect that had hollowed out my life. At night, when the house was still, I opened the folder and studied the pages under the soft glow of my desk lamp. My pulse would quicken, my mind racing. This wasn't just planning, it was survival. But the weight of it all pressed down on me. The house felt foreign, like I was squatting in someone else's home. Meals with Eleanor were strained. Our conversations, clipped. Sometimes I'd catch her scrolling through her phone, smiling at Kevin's posts online. Photos of him at fancy restaurants, boasting about new deals in the works all funded with the money he stole. I was living in my own shadow, stripped of dignity, trapped in a home where I no longer belonged. And yet, as much as it hurt, the silence gave me something I hadn't had before, clarity. I knew I couldn't stay in this place forever. I knew I couldn't keep playing the fool. Something had to change. And deep down, I had already begun to imagine how. The first real shift came quietly, almost unnoticeable at first. I stopped waiting for Eleanor or Kevin to acknowledge me. I stopped trying to win back respect in a house where it no longer existed. Instead, I turned inward. At dawn, when Eleanor was still asleep, I'd slip out of the house and drive. Sometimes to the library, sometimes to the park, sometimes just to nowhere in particular. At first, I thought I was simply running away from the heaviness of the house. But slowly, those hours became mine again. I started reading books on finance, on business, on psychology. I hadn't studied like that since I was in my 20s. And each page pulled me further out of the fog. I realized something Kevin would never admit. Experience mattered. I had 41 years of it. By chance, I ran into an old colleague, Daniel, at the library. He'd retired a few years before me, but unlike me, he hadn't disappeared into the background. He'd been consulting for smaller companies, part-time, helping them streamline operations. "Pays well enough to keep life interesting," he said with a grin. That night, I thought about our conversation for hours. Consulting. It wasn't something I had ever considered. I thought retirement was the end of usefulness. But what if it wasn't? I pulled out my laptop, the same one Kevin always mocked for being outdated, and started drafting a profile on a professional network. I listed my years of experience, the projects I'd overseen, the crises I'd managed. It felt strange, almost arrogant, to put it all into words. But when I hit publish, a small surge of pride filled me. Within a week, I had my first inquiry. A regional logistics firm wanted advice on restructuring their supply chain. It was small scale, but the moment I sat across the table from their managers, laying out solutions, I felt alive again. They actually listened like my words had value. They paid me for my time, too, more than Kevin ever promised in his so-called venture. That first check wasn't about the money. It was about proof that I wasn't finally useless. I didn't tell Eleanor. Not at first. I didn't tell Kevin either. When they asked where I was going in the mornings, I just said I was keeping busy. They didn't press. Eleanor was too absorbed in Kevin's world, and Kevin assumed I was sulking. But quietly, I built momentum. Word spread. One client led to another, and soon, I was balancing multiple consulting gigs. My calendar filled up. My bank account, once bled dry, began to recover. Not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily. Each deposit was another brick in the wall I was rebuilding around myself. With the work came something I hadn't felt in years: confidence. My back straightened. My voice grew firmer. I no longer hovered around the house waiting for scraps of respect. I had purpose again, but this time it wasn't for Eleanor or Kevin. It was for me. Nina noticed first. One afternoon, I called her just to catch up. She said, "You sound different, Dad. Happier, stronger." I smiled into the phone. Maybe I am. Meanwhile, Kevin was spiraling in the opposite direction. His venture wasn't taking off the way he bragged online. The flashy posts of dinners and parties grew less frequent, replaced by vague quotes about hustling and trusting the process. I knew what that meant. Money was drying up. He still had Eleanor's blind loyalty, but cracks were showing. Sometimes I'd overhear her on the phone with him, her voice sharp, asking when he'd pay back what he borrowed. I stayed quiet, listening, filing it away. One evening, Kevin barged into the house, pacing like a storm. "Dad, I need more. The investors are pulling out unless I can cover the shortfall. This is make or break time." I looked at him calmly, something I couldn't have done months earlier. "I don't have anything for you." His jaw clenched. "Don't play games. You've got accounts, assets. You can unlock something." I said no. My voice was steady, cold. Eleanor rushed to his side, glaring at me. "Walter, stop being selfish. This is your son, your blood. Don't you want him to succeed?" I didn't answer. I just turned and walked into my office, leaving them standing in the kitchen. For the first time, it didn't feel like retreat. It felt like control. Inside, I opened my hidden folder, now much thicker than before. Bank statements, contracts, proof of unauthorized transfers, everything I'd need if the time came to expose them. My consulting work had sharpened me, reminded me of the precision required in documentation. Each page was a weapon waiting for its moment. And as I slid the latest document into place, I realized something important. I wasn't at rock bottom anymore. I was climbing quietly, steadily out of the pit they had shoved me into. They thought I was fading. They thought I was beaten. They had no idea what was coming. It was almost poetic how the opportunity came to me, not through force or confrontation, but through the natural cracks forming in Kevin's empire of ego. By early autumn, my consulting work had blossomed. I had 3 steady clients and a handful of smaller ones. The money wasn't astronomical, but it was consistent, clean, and mine. Every invoice I sent, every payment I received, felt like a stitch mending the wound they had torn open. I started a new account, one Eleanor didn't know about. Quiet deposits, a growing balance, untouchable. One morning, I got a call from Daniel, the colleague who had nudged me into consulting. "Walter," he said, "there's a company downstate looking for a short-term interim director. Supply chain mess, leadership vacuum, the works. I told them about you. Interested?" I almost laughed. Me? Back in a director's seat after retirement? But the more he explained, the more sense it made. It was temporary, high-paying, and most importantly, powerful. A chance to step into a role where my experience wasn't just valued, it was needed. I accepted. Within 2 weeks, I was commuting twice a week, staying in a modest hotel paid for by the company, and running operations like I had never left. The staff respected me. The executives trusted me. And for the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Not the finally useless man from the cake, but Walter, the fixer, the man people turned to when things mattered. Eleanor noticed my absence, of course. She'd ask, "Where are you going all the time?" I'd smile and say, "Keeping busy." She didn't press. She was too focused on Kevin, who by now was drowning in his own failures. The signs were everywhere. His investors stopped showing up. His phone calls grew frantic, his voice sharper. I overheard one conversation where he barked at Eleanor, "I just need another bridge loan. Dad's got to sign it." "He will. He always does." But this time I didn't. Then came the night I overheard the truth that set the stage for everything. Kevin was in the kitchen with Eleanor, his voice low but urgent. I was in my office, door cracked just enough. "Mom, if Dad doesn't give me access, I'm sunk," he hissed. "The investors are threatening to sue. I've been moving money around to cover, but it's not enough. If anyone finds out, I'm done." My chest tightened. Moving money around. Investors threatening to sue. He wasn't just reckless. He was in deep, legally. Eleanor whispered back, "I'll talk to him. He's being difficult, but he'll listen to me eventually. He always does." I closed my eyes, letting the words settle. For decades, I had been the one they leaned on, the one who fixed everything, the one who sacrificed. But now they weren't leaning on me. They were trying to use me as a shield for Kevin's collapse. And that's when the plan began to crystallize. The folder in my office wasn't just evidence anymore. It was leverage. I had bank statements showing unauthorized transfers, contracts with my forged signature, proof that Eleanor had co-signed withdrawals behind my back. Combined with Kevin's mounting legal troubles, it was enough to burn their house of cards to the ground. At the same time, my position at the company gave me new connections. Lawyers, financial experts, people who understood how to navigate messy situations with precision. I didn't announce my intentions. I didn't rant or rave. I just started asking quiet questions, learning what would happen if evidence of financial misconduct came to light. The answers were clear. Kevin could be ruined. Eleanor, too, if tied to his schemes. But I wasn't reckless. Revenge wasn't about striking blindly. It was about patience, about letting them dig their own grave. While I built my escape, I began moving more of my assets into the new account, carefully, discreetly. I arranged for my consulting payments to flow there directly. I spoke to a lawyer about updating my will and revising account access. No more automatic rights for Eleanor. No way for Kevin to reach in. Meanwhile, I played the part of the tired, retired man. Around them, I was quiet, withdrawn, even pliant. Eleanor took my silence as submission. Kevin saw it as weakness. They didn't realize I was buying time. Then came the moment that sealed it. Nina called one evening, her voice soft but insistent. "Dad, I don't know what's going on, but I feel like you're hiding something. Are you all right?" For the first time, I didn't lie. I didn't tell her everything, but I said enough. "I'm finding my footing again, sweetheart. And when the time comes, I'll need you to trust me." There was a pause. Then she said, "I always have." It was the lifeline I needed. I wasn't alone anymore. Not truly. And as I hung up the phone, I realized the pieces were finally in place. Kevin was cornered. Eleanor was blind. And I was holding all the cards. They thought I was powerless. But in truth, I was standing at the threshold of something far greater. The chance to strike came faster than I expected. Kevin's world was crumbling, and desperation makes people reckless. It was a gray Thursday afternoon when he showed up at the house unannounced. He didn't knock. He never did anymore. He stormed straight into the living room, papers in hand, sweat beading on his forehead. Eleanor trailed behind him, wringing her hands like a nervous accomplice. "Dad, this is it," Kevin said, slapping the papers down on the coffee table. "Final chance. If you don't sign this, everything collapses. The investors will sue. The whole venture goes down. We'll all be ruined." I looked at the papers calmly, my heart steady. It was another loan application, bigger this time, over $100,000. My name was pre-filled, my supposed consent implied. But what caught my eye wasn't the number. It was the fact that he had already forged my signature on one of the drafts. Sloppy, desperate, arrogant. "I'm not signing this," I said quietly. Kevin's face reddened. "Don't play games. This is for the family, for you, for Mom, for the future." Eleanor's voice trembled as she chimed in. "Walter, please. He's right. If this fails, we lose everything. Think of the house, the reputation." I cut her off, my tone sharp but calm. "You already lost everything the moment you started stealing from me." The room froze. Kevin blinked. Eleanor's mouth opened and closed like she couldn't find the words. I reached into the drawer of the side table and pulled out the folder I had been building for months. Neatly stacked, tabbed, organized, bank statements, transfer receipts, forged contracts, all laid out like an indictment. I set it on the table between us. "Do you see this?" I said, my voice steady. "Every dollar you took, every document you forged, every withdrawal Eleanor co-signed. I've kept it all. Copies notarized. Lawyers have seen it. If I file this, Kevin, your investors won't just sue you, they'll bury you. And Eleanor, you'll go down with him." Eleanor gasped, her face draining of color. Kevin's bravado faltered. He reached for the papers, but I placed my hand firmly on top. "No," I said. "You don't get to touch this." He stammered. "Dad, you wouldn't. You can't." I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "I would and I can. But here's the difference between us, Kevin. I don't need to scream or brag to prove my power. I've already taken it back." For the first time, he looked small. The swagger melted away, replaced by the raw panic of a man who realized the safety net was gone. "I'll make it right," he muttered. "Just give me time." "You had time," I replied, "and you wasted it." Then, turning to Eleanor, I said, "You stood by him. You signed off on my future without a second thought, and you laughed at me when he called me useless." I let the words hang in the air. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm done funding his failures. I'm done being mocked in my own home. From this moment forward, my accounts are locked, my assets moved, and neither of you will see a cent without going through me." Kevin's jaw tightened, fury flashing in his eyes. "You can't just cut us off." I smiled faintly. "Watch me." I stood, gathered the folder, and walked toward my office. Behind me, I could hear Eleanor trying to calm him, her voice breaking, his voice rising in anger. But I didn't turn back. In my office, I locked the folder away. Not because I needed it right then, but because its very existence gave me control. Every shred of evidence was a leash around their necks, and they knew it. The days that followed were a storm. Kevin called, texted, even showed up at my office demanding another chance, swearing he'd turn things around. Eleanor pleaded with me at night, insisting I was being too harsh, that family should stick together. But I didn't bend. Instead, I kept working, kept building. My consulting business thrived. My savings grew, and the more they flailed, the stronger I felt. Revenge wasn't loud or flashy. It was quiet, deliberate, and devastating. By stripping away their access, I forced them to face the consequences of their own arrogance. And though they didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of their unraveling. The fallout came like a slow-moving storm. At first, a drizzle, then a downpour, then the kind of thunder that shakes a house to its foundations. The first crack came when Kevin's investors finally snapped. With no fresh cash flowing in from me, his juggling act collapsed. One morning, I received an email from a lawyer representing one of those investors. They had come across my name on the forged documents, and they wanted clarification. I replied with 2 lines. "I did not sign these papers." Attached are notarized copies of my original documents proving unauthorized transfers. That was enough. Within weeks, Kevin was drowning in legal notices. His venture, once paraded online as the next big success story, became a cautionary tale whispered about in hushed tones. Lawsuits piled up. His so-called friends stopped answering his calls. The social media feeds that once displayed dinners, Rolexes, and champagne dried up completely. Eleanor tried to shield him at first. She met with lawyers, sold her jewelry, even whispered about taking out a second mortgage. But when she discovered that I had already moved my share of the house into a trust with Nina as beneficiary, the realization hit her. She couldn't drag me down with them. For once, she had to face the wreckage she had enabled. The fights grew louder. I heard them through closed doors, Eleanor begging, Kevin snapping, both of them pointing fingers, and I stayed silent, calm. The man they thought was powerless, now watching them unravel under the weight of their own choices. One evening, after yet another shouting match in the kitchen, Kevin stormed out, tires screeching down the street. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her shoulders slumped, her face pale. When she turned to me, her eyes were filled with something I hadn't seen in years. Not anger, not mockery, but fear. "Walter," she whispered, "what have we done?" I didn't answer. Nina flew in a week later. When she stepped into the house, she hugged me tight. No questions asked. She had known, somehow, that I was waiting for her, that everything I had built these last months was for a future where respect still existed. Together, we began the process of untangling what was left. Lawyers, banks, accounts all sorted with meticulous care. Kevin eventually declared bankruptcy. Eleanor moved in with her sister, claiming she needed space to think. I let her go. For the first time in decades, I felt no obligation to chase after her, no weight pressing me to fix what they had broken. And me? I kept working, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. My consulting business flourished. My new account grew. For the first time, I wasn't living for anyone else's approval. Months later, I sat on the porch of a modest cabin I had rented by the lake. Nina was visiting for the weekend, sipping coffee beside me. The air was crisp, the water still. She looked at me and said softly, "You don't look useless to me, Dad. You look free." I smiled, The words settling into me like a bomb. Finally free, I echoed. That was the real ending. Not the cake, not the party, not the betrayal. It was the moment I realized that revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about reclaiming the life they tried to steal from me and walking away while they crumbled under the weight of their own choices. And I did walk away.